The courtroom was suffocating, thick with the scent of cheap mahogany, old paper, and expensive lawyers. For 5 long years, Anthony had poured his entire soul into building a global logistics empire from scratch. He had missed birthdays, survived on 4 hours of sleep a night, and weathered economic collapses, all with one singular goal: to secure a legacy. But to his wife Vanessa, that empire was just a bottomless checkbook. When the divorce papers landed on his desk, she didn't just want a fair settlement. She wanted to dismantle him entirely. She took the penthouse in New York, the European sports cars, and 40% of the liquid capital. But Anthony kept his secret weapon, remaining 55% of his company's stock and a hidden, undervalued asset he had purchased years ago, a remote, undeveloped island in the South Pacific known as Cayo de la Luna. While Vanessa celebrated her massive cash payout in Miami, assuming Anthony was ruined, he did something radical. He sold his remaining shares, cut all ties with the corporate treadmill, and packed a single leather duffel bag. He didn't need the city anymore. He flew out to his island, a pristine paradise of turquoise waters, towering palm trees, and absolute silence. It was raw, unpolished, and completely his. Over the next 2 years, Anthony poured his residual wealth and engineering mindset into turning the island into a self-sustaining luxury sanctuary. He didn't build a gaudy mansion. He designed an eco-friendly, architectural masterpiece that blended into the volcanic cliffs. He hired a private security team led by Marcus, a disciplined former military commander, not for show, but because true privacy requires absolute protection. Anthony learned to appreciate the quiet. He traded tailored Italian suits for linen shirts, starting his mornings with a swim in the crystal clear ocean rather than a frantic review of stock tickers. He learned the names of the local birds, understood the patterns of the tides, and finally found peace. His wealth was no longer a scorecard measured against others. It was a tool for personal freedom. But true peace is a magnet for those who live in chaos. Word of Anthony's ultra-exclusive private island sanctuary eventually leaked into high society, architectural magazines. The world realized that the broken ex-husband had actually achieved a level of wealth and serenity that money could rarely buy. Back in Florida, Vanessa's lavish lifestyle had caught up with her. Bad investments, manipulative financial advisors, and an insatiable need to show off had drained her millions. When she saw the sprawling, sun-drenched photos of Anthony's island estate, a toxic mixture of jealousy and desperation took over. She called her aggressive divorce attorney, demanding they find a loophole. The attorney pointed out that, while the island land itself was bought before the final separation, the multi-million-dollar estate built on it used funds that she claimed were hidden during the discovery phase. Armed with a hastily drafted legal injunction and a burning sense of entitlement, Vanessa rented a rusty local transport boat from the nearest mainland port, refusing to wait for a standard luxury charter. She wanted to ambush him. The morning she arrived, the sky was a blinding, flawless blue. Anthony was standing on his private wooden pier, enjoying a glass of vintage champagne to celebrate the completion of his island's solar grid. Marcus stood a few paces behind him, scanning the horizon. The peace was shattered by the sputtering, choking cough of a diesel engine. A battered, rust-stained industrial boat cut through the pristine turquoise water, leaving an oily film in its wake. Standing at the bow, gripping the railing like a conquering general entering a hostile territory, was Vanessa. She wore a tight, expensive designer dress that was completely impractical for the sea. Her face twisted in a look of fierce determination. The contrast was stark. Anthony, calm and collected in his sharp blue suit on a flawless pier, and Vanessa, shouting over the engine roar from a decaying vessel, holding a stack of legal documents high in the air. To transform this vision into reality, Anthony had to completely reinvent his understanding of architecture and survival. The first 6 months on the island were spent not in luxury, but in a small canvas tent, battling the elements and mapping the terrain. He worked side by side with the local engineers he flew in from the mainland, learning how to mix concrete that could withstand the high salinity of the ocean air, and mapping the paths of the tropical storms that regularly swept through the region. He did not want to impose a rigid, concrete monstrosity onto this delicate ecosystem. He wanted to build something that harmonized with nature. The villa was constructed using local volcanic stone and sustainably harvested teak wood. Large, floor-to-ceiling glass panels were engineered to retract completely into the walls, blurring the line between indoor living and the vastness of the Pacific Ocean. He designed a massive rainwater filtration system, capable of storing and purifying 50,000 gallons of water, and he covered the hidden roofs with cutting-edge solar tiles that stored energy in a massive subterranean battery bank. By the time the construction was finished, Antony had created a fully independent kingdom. He had built an organic farm on the eastern side of the island, yielding fresh fruits and vegetables year-round, and established a small desalination plant. This project was his rehabilitation. Every nail driven into the wood, every solar panel aligned toward the equator, was a step away from the toxic, transactional relationships that had defined his past life. He realized that the corporate world he had left behind was built on a foundation of shifting sand, where people valued you only for what they could extract from you. On Cayo de la Luna, value was absolute. If the solar panels weren't clean, there was no power. If the filters weren't maintained, there was no water. Nature did not care about social status, clever legal maneuvers, or superficial charm. It demanded competence, respect, and discipline. This realization completely transformed his psychology. His posture straightened. His eyes grew sharper, and the constant, underlying anxiety that had haunted him for decades evaporated. He had achieved true sovereignty, a state of being where his internal peace was completely decoupled from the opinions and actions of the outside world. He spent his evenings reading, watching the sun dip below the endless horizon, and meditating on the true purpose of his remaining years. He began planning a philanthropic foundation to fund marine conservation efforts in the surrounding archipelago, wanting to give back to the ocean that had healed his soul. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away in the concrete jungle of Miami, Vanessa's world was violently unraveling. The multi-million-dollar settlement she had fought so viciously for was disappearing like water through her fingers. She had fallen into the classic trap of the suddenly wealthy, confusing capital with cash flow. She surrounded herself with an entourage of sycophants, spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on high-end fashion lines that she wore only once, and purchased a massive mansion in Coral Gables that required an army of staff to maintain. She wanted to prove to the world, and to herself, that she was the true winner of the divorce. But without Anthony's disciplined financial stewardship, her wealth was nothing more than a ticking clock. She allowed herself to be guided by smooth-talking financial managers who promised impossible returns on highly volatile cryptocurrency, ventures, and speculative real estate funds. Within 18 months, those funds collapsed, taking a massive portion of her liquid capital with them. Panic began to set in. The luxury brands that once courted her now sent polite but firm collection notices. The friends who had crowded around her yachts vanished the moment the party stopped. Being free, it was during this desperate period of financial freefall that she happened to pick up an International Architectural Digest while waiting in her attorney's office. There, spread across 8 glossy pages, was Antony's Island Paradise. The article described it as a masterclass in independent luxury, valuation experts estimating the property's worth at over $30 million due to its unique, self-sustaining infrastructure and sovereign location. Looking at the photographs of her ex-husband standing confidently on his sun-drenched terrace, looking younger, healthier, and more successful than ever, Vanessa felt a profound, burning rage. It was an insult to her ego. How dare he thrive while she was struggling? How dare he find peace after she had tried so hard to break him? She convinced herself that this island was a direct result of fraud. She believed that Antony must have deliberately hidden these millions during their asset discovery phase, moving money through complex networks of shell corporations to buy this land before their final signature. She did not want to accept the reality that he had simply used his remaining share of the split wisely while she had squandered hers. She demanded that her chief litigation attorney, a ruthless man named Richard, find a way to reopen the case. Richard, smelling an opportunity for massive billable hours, drafted a highly aggressive, though legally shaky, maritime property injunction. He claimed that because the original funds used to secure the raw land option occurred during the final years of the marriage, the appreciated value of the entire estate was subject to post-divorce distribution. Armed with these papers, Vanessa decided that a standard legal delivery would not suffice. She wanted to see the look on Anthony's face when she took back what she believed was hers. She flew to the nearest regional port, bypassing luxury travel entirely due to her restricted credit lines, and hired a battered commercial transport vessel normally used to haul industrial equipment between the islands. She was going to reclaim her empire, completely unaware that she was walking into a world where her old weapons held absolutely no power. The heavy iron hull of the Sea Rogue scraped violently against the pristine timber of the pier, leaving a long, ugly streak of black grease and rust on the treated wood. The local captain quickly threw the engine into neutral, the mechanical roar dying down to a rhythmic, heavy thumping that seemed to vibrate through the entire bay. Vanessa did not wait for the vessel to settle. In an act of pure desperation and anger, she took a wide step over the gap. Her high-heel shoe catching the edge of the wooden deck, she stumbled forward, nearly losing her balance but caught herself, her face instantly twisting back into an expression of fierce hostility. She marched directly toward Anthony, thrusting the thick stack of legal documents forward until they were mere inches from his chest. The white paper fluttered in the warm tropical breeze, a stark contrast to the deep blue of his tailored suit. "Look at this place, Anthony," Vanessa screamed, her voice cracking under the weight of her built-up resentment. She swept her left arm in a wide, dramatic arc, pointing toward the sweeping white sand beaches, the manicured palms, and the architectural masterpiece of the villa built into the high volcanic cliffs. "You played the victim in the divorce court. You wept to the judge about supply chain collapses and failing investments. And all the while, you were funneling money out of our marital accounts to build this billionaire's paradise. My lawyers spent months tracking your foreign holding companies. You used our shared life to fund your escape. Half of this dirt belongs to me, and I am not leaving this island until my name is on that deed." Marcus shifted his weight instantly, stepping forward to position his massive frame between Vanessa and his employer. His hand moved toward his side, ready to signal the security team on the beach to intervene and remove the intruder. But Anthony raised a single calm hand, stopping Marcus in his tracks. Anthony did not flinch, nor did his expression change. He looked down at the documents, then raised his eyes to look directly into Vanessa's face. His gaze was entirely devoid of anger, fear, or bitterness. It was the look of a seasoned corporate executive reviewing a deeply flawed business proposal. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his champagne, allowing the silence of the island to settle over the pier once again, making Vanessa's loud screams feel incredibly small and out of place. "Vanessa," Anthony said, his voice remarkably calm, steady, and carrying effortlessly over the gentle lap of the turquoise waves. "You received exactly what you negotiated for in our settlement, the immediate, liquid gratification of cash, luxury real estate, and global assets. You wanted those things because you view wealth as a consumable resource. You wanted to show off the prize without understanding the machinery required to maintain it. This island is not a collection of hidden marital cash. It is the result of meticulous planning, aggressive risk management, and intense physical labor concepts you have spent your entire life actively avoiding." Vanessa let out a bitter, mocking laugh, waving the papers again as if they gave her absolute protection. "Save your patronizing corporate lectures for your boardrooms, Anthony. The law is the law no matter how far you run." My litigation attorney filed an emergency temporary injunction in the international maritime courts until a judge reviews our asset tracing and determines exactly how much hidden capital was used to construct this luxury estate. I have a legally protected right to occupy these premises. I am moving into the master suite of that villa today, and you can sleep out here with your security guards." She turned around toward the rusted boat, shouting a sharp command to the captain to start unloading her massive designer leather suitcases. But the captain remained perfectly still. He kept both hands firmly on the steering wheel, his eyes darting nervously between Vanessa and the armed security team standing behind Anthony. He recognized immediately that the true authority on this water did not belong to the screaming woman who had hired him. The heavy silence of the South Pacific wrapped around the pier like a physical weight, broken only by the low, steady thumping of the Sea Rogue's ancient diesel engine. Vanessa stood frozen on the treated wooden planks, her expensive leather heels shifting slightly as she tried to maintain her aggressive, dominant posture. But the atmosphere on Cayo de la Luna was entirely different from the air-conditioned courtrooms of Miami or the crowded, high-society gala halls she was used to navigating. Out here, isolated by thousands of miles of open, deep ocean, her dramatic outbursts did not echo. They were simply swallowed up by the immense vastness of the sky and the sea. She looked at Anthony, whose face remained a mask of absolute serenity. And then she glanced at Marcus, whose disciplined, unblinking gaze never left her. For the first time in her entire life, Vanessa felt a sudden sharp pang of isolation. The absolute certainty that had fueled her rage during the long flight from Florida began to fracture, replaced by a cold, creeping realization that she had stepped into a territory where her social standing meant absolutely nothing. "Marcus," Anthony said quietly, his voice breaking the silence without a single hint of strain or anger. He did not look away from his ex-wife, keeping his eyes locked onto hers with a calm detachment that made her feel transparent. "Please be so kind as to educate our unexpected guest on the precise legal and maritime status of Cayo de la Luna." Marcus stepped forward instantly, his heavy boots clicking rhythmically against the wooden deck. He stood tall, his broad shoulders squared, embodying the absolute discipline of his military background. He pulled a small laminated security folder from his tactical vest, though he did not need to look at it to recite the protocols. "Ma'am," Marcus stated, his tone professional, crisp, and entirely devoid of emotion. "This landmass operates under an independent sovereign land charter, fully registered under international maritime sector regulations, and recognized by the regional archipelago authority, domestic family court judgments, civil property injunctions, and asset tracing filings originating from the United States or any foreign municipality carry absolutely zero legal jurisdiction or enforcement power within these waters, upon this pier, or across this island." Vanessa's jaw tightened, her fingers clenching, the stack of papers so hard that the edges began to wrinkle and tear. "That is impossible," she stammered, her voice losing its sharp, commanding edge and rising to a defensive pitch. "My lawyer is one of the top litigation experts in the state of Florida. He reviewed the global maritime codes. He told me that because the initial purchase options for this territory were secured before our final separation agreement was signed. The entire appreciated value of this estate is legally considered a marital asset. Your attorney is a domestic civil litigator," Vanessa Anthony replied, his voice smooth and steady as he took a final, slow sip of his vintage champagne. "He specializes in performance, theater, and emotional intimidation within a specific geographical jurisdiction. He told you exactly what you wanted to hear so that he could continue billing you hundreds of dollars an hour while you drained the remainder of your settlement. When I chose to invest in Cayo de la Luna, I didn't just buy dirt. I hired international maritime scholars to build an unshakable sovereign trust. The land, the villa, the infrastructure, and the security grid are held by a foreign entity that operates completely outside the scope of your legal reach. You have spent your final resources to buy a ticket to a theater that has already been closed." Marcus stepped forward an inch closer, his presence a polite but firm barrier. "Furthermore, ma'am, this pier is designated as private industrial property. The vessel you arrived on, the Sea Rogue, is currently mooring without an authorized commercial berth permit or a recorded maritime entry clearance. Under sector safety codes, this constitutes an active civil maritime trespass. Under the authority granted to this security detail by the island's charter, we are legally authorized to detain the vessel and escort all unauthorized personnel back to the international boundary line immediately. Vanessa looked past Marcus at the two security guards standing at the end of the pier. They had not moved a single muscle, but their hands were resting casually near their equipment belts. She turned back to Anthony, her face flushing a deep, angry crimson as the reality of her total lack of leverage began to settle into her chest. She had expected to find a bitter, defensive ex-husband whom she could guilt-trip, threaten, or manipulate using the media and old emotional triggers. Instead, she was standing in front of a man who had completely removed himself from her grid, an individual who had constructed an independent kingdom, designed specifically to withstand external chaos. You think you are so incredibly clever, don't you? Vanessa spat, her voice trembling violently as she tried to salvage whatever dignity she had left. She thrust the papers toward his face one last time, but her arm lacked the fierce energy it had possessed just 10 minutes prior. You planned this whole thing. You deliberately hid your true net worth from the court. You cheated me out of the life I helped you build for 18 years. You sit up here in your luxury fortress while I am forced to watch my investments crumble, and you expect me to just walk away? I didn't cheat you, Vanessa, Anthony said, his tone softening slightly, not out of weakness but out of a deep, philosophical pity. For 18 years I gave you every single luxury the world had to offer. I built an international logistics network through sheer discipline, sleepless nights, and immense personal sacrifice. When we divorced, you demanded 40% of that empire in immediate, cold cash because you believed that money was something to be displayed and consumed. You took the cars, the penthouses, and the bank accounts because you wanted the immediate status. I took the remaining stock and this raw, empty island because I wanted the long-term freedom. You spent your capital on depreciating liabilities that lost value the moment you showed them off to your friends. I invested my capital into self-sustaining infrastructure, renewable energy, and sovereign legal protection. Your current financial distress is not the result of my actions. It is the mathematical consequence of your own choices. The heavy stack of legal documents slowly slipped from Vanessa's fingers, the individual pages catching the warm tropical breeze as they fell. They scattered across the dark, polished wood of the pier, some drifting over the edge to float uselessly on the surface of the translucent turquoise water. The ink began to bleed instantly, dissolving the aggressive threats into illegible blue smears that disappeared into the ocean. She watched them drift away, her face entirely pale, the fiery energy that had brought her across the ocean completely extinguished. Anthony didn't look down at the papers. He kept his eyes fixed on the horizon, his expression a calm, unreadable canvas of total detachment. He took a final slow sip of his vintage champagne, setting the empty crystal glass down onto a small, hand-carved teak table that stood beside him. The gentle clink of the crystal against the wood was the only sound that broke the absolute quiet of the bay. "Captain," Anthony called out, his voice crisp and clear, carrying effortlessly across the short distance. To the Sea Rogue, the weathered man in the black baseball cap immediately leaned his head out of the cabin window, his posture tense and respectful. "You have exactly 20 minutes to utilize my southern fuel dock to top off your diesel tanks for your return journey to the mainland. My security team will facilitate the lines. However, your passenger must remain on board your vessel for the duration of the refueling process. The moment your tanks are filled, you are instructed to clear my territorial waters immediately. If your vessel is detected within my maritime boundary after that time, my security detail will proceed with standard maritime impoundment protocols." The captain nodded rapidly, his face showing immense relief at the offer of free fuel and a safe exit strategy from an incredibly tense situation. "Yes, sir." "Thank you, sir." 20 minutes and we are gone," he shouted back, immediately shifting the old transmission into reverse. The ancient diesel engine let out another heavy, sputtering cough, throwing a final cloud of dark carbon smoke into the air as the gap between the rusted iron hull and the immaculate wooden pier began to widen. Vanessa stood completely frozen on the deck of the retreating boat. For the first time in her life, her beauty, her anger, her high-priced litigation lawyers, and her loud, theatrical voice had absolutely no power to alter the fabric of reality. She was drifting away from the very paradise she had desperately sought to claim, trapped on a decaying, rusted industrial vessel that perfectly mirrored her internal world. She didn't scream anymore. The immense, crushing realization of her total defeat had finally silenced her. Anthony did not stand on the pier to watch the boat pull away. He turned his back to the ocean, looking up at his hillside villa, where the modern glass panels glistened brilliantly in the midday sun. He felt no malice toward Vanessa, nor did he experience a sense of petty, triumphant satisfaction. To harbor those emotions would mean he was still tied to her ecosystem, still seeking validation from her reactions. Instead, he felt a profound, beautiful sense of closure. The final lingering link to his past life had arrived. Tried to tear down his sanctuary using the old tools of manipulation, and had been effortlessly deflected by the sheer strength of his preparation, structure, and character. He walked back down the wooden pier toward the shore, his footsteps firm, measured, and steady. Marcus fell into step exactly 3 paces behind him, his communication radio crackling softly as the security team resumed their quiet, watchful patrols around the island's perimeter. As Anthony reached the soft, white sands of the main beach, the distant, rhythmic chopping of rotor blades echoed from behind the volcanic peaks. A sleek, matte black corporate helicopter appeared over the tree line, its side bearing the elegant, minimalist logo of Anthony's newly established global foundation. The aircraft hovered gracefully for a moment before descending toward his private, cliffside helipad. This flight wasn't bringing high society celebrities or corporate elites to party. It was carrying a specialized cargo of advanced medical equipment, water purification components, and educational supplies that Anthony was personally donating to the underdeveloped mainland communities across the archipelago. This was the true reflection of what his wealth was for now. He had completely transcended the small, toxic world of corporate greed, superficial status, and personal drama. He had built a fortress not just out of solid stone, volcanic rock, and reinforced concrete, but out of wisdom, emotional resilience, and unshakable peace. Cayo de la Luna was no longer a place to hide from his past. It was the ultimate launching pad for his future. The helicopter touched down with a soft hiss of its hydraulic suspension, its rotors slowing to a smooth, idle spin as the ground crew rushed forward to secure the cargo doors. Anthony stood at the edge of the helipad, the wind from the blades rustling his linen shirt, his eyes sweeping across the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, far out on the horizon. The Sea Rogue was nothing more than a tiny, dark speck against the endless blue, its trail of black smoke completely dissolved by the clean, sweeping ocean winds. The intrusion was over, the air was pure once again, and the sovereignty of his kingdom remained entirely absolute. Anthony walked over to the cargo bay, personally greeting the logistics coordinator who had flown in from the regional capital. He looked at the manifest of supplies, verifying the distribution. Routes for the schools and medical clinics on the neighboring islands. This was the true generation of value, not the hoarding of cash to display in high society, Miami circles, but the strategic application of resources to build sustainable, real-world systems that lifted others up. His past life with Vanessa felt like a distant, faded dream, a necessary trial by fire that had broken his illusions and forced him to discover who he truly was. He had lost an empire of paper and glass, but in return, he had gained an empire of land, purpose, and unshakable self-mastery. As the sun began its slow, majestic descent toward the western horizon, casting long, golden streaks of light across the white sand beaches and the volcanic cliffs, Anthony walked back toward the open terrace of his villa. He sat down at his desk, turned on his satellite terminal, and began reviewing the architectural plans for a new, marine research laboratory he intended to build on the northern point of the island. The quiet of the evening returned, deep, profound, and absolute. There were no court summonses waiting for him, no toxic arguments echoing through the halls, and no superficial expectations to meet. He was completely self-contained, completely protected, and completely at peace. The sovereign island paradigm was complete. The peacefulness of Cayo de la Luna was not something Anthony took for granted. He had earned it through a meticulous reconstruction of his entire lifestyle. Every element of the island had been designed to foster focus, mental clarity, and independent longevity. After completing his evening review of the Oceanographic Research Center plans, he walked down into his private library, a room built directly into the cool basalt stone of the cliffside. The walls were lined with thousands of physical books, texts ranging from classical Stoic philosophy and advanced international law to complex manuals on marine biology and solar engineering. He had purposely chosen physical books over digital screens out here. He wanted his knowledge to be tactile, tangible, and unhurried. He selected a leather-bound volume of historical essays and stepped back out onto the terrace. The temperature had dropped to a perfect cool tropical breeze, and the stars were beginning to emerge across the velvet sky, completely free from the light pollution of the modern world. In this absolute quiet, Anthony looked out at the ocean once more. He understood that true wealth meant never having to compromise his time, his attention, or his ethical standards for the sake of survival. Vanessa had spent her entire life trying to conquer external spaces, demanding attention from crowds, and manipulating individuals to secure her position. Anthony had chosen the opposite path. He had conquered his internal world, and as a result, the external world had organized itself around his clarity. Anthony was home, he was sovereign, and he was completely free. Anthony's victory wasn't a triumph of pettiness. It was a masterclass in systemic literacy. This story exposes a brutal economic truth. Vanessa viewed wealth as a consumable resource to display status, while Anthony understood wealth as a self-sustaining ecosystem built on discipline and asset protection. When you rely on entitlement, expecting a harvest where you never planted seeds, or foundation is built on quicksand. True sovereignty means protecting your life's work long before the storm arrives. Anthony